I'm Gabrielle Principe, the Education Section Editor for This View of Life, the online Evolution magazine. I'm here with Daniel Berch, who is a professor of educational psychology and applied developmental science at the University of Virginia. Hi, Dan.
Hello.
Dan, I'm talking with you about research that you presented on the evolutionary history of teaching skills at a conference that was supported by the Evolution Institute and the AERA, entitled Evolutionary Perspectives on Educational Research, Policy, and Practice. Now, whereas most educational researchers focus on the proximate or immediate psychological and environmental influences on teaching behaviors, you're particularly interested in questions about why teaching evolved in the first place and what fitness benefits it affords our species. So tell us a little bit about why, in your view, it's important to consider teaching from an evolutionary perspective.
Well, it's clearly, as most researchers would agree, a very important form of cooperation, and clearly also involves kind of social learning. But as with other behaviors of humans, it's helpful to try to ask questions about the origins in the event that understanding the functional value of teaching might be able to provide us with a clearer understanding of the factors that have led it to be so important in contemporary society, as well as perhaps helping us understand individual differences, variation, ability to teach, and perhaps in ways that might eventually help us design both techniques for identifying potentially good teachers, as well as making decisions about ways in which to improve teaching through professional development. Again, there may be some special kinds of insights that an evolutionary perspective could provide.
Good. Well, talk a bit more about what you've learned about the idea of variation. Do the ideas that you're exploring suggest that we're all equally good at teaching?
Well, that's interesting because I think much of the work, at least from the standpoint of an evolutionary perspective, hasn't really focused on that as much. It's tried to look at sort of the origins of this, and in fact, much of that work has really been done with animals. And so, but in order to answer your question more, there certainly a lot of contemporary work that is on the proximate factors that go into the skills, how why some teachers, what makes a good teacher, what doesn't, and that work is very important. Certainly understanding those current mechanisms, but we really don't have much information from an evolutionary perspective about factors that might have led to those variations. But I can give you a hint of what I think some of that would be, because clearly for most people, at least in terms of human teaching, there has to be what researchers, developmentalists call a theory of mind. You have to be able to appreciate your students' perhaps lack of knowledge or lack of adequate knowledge, maybe even having certain false beliefs that need to be corrected. Presumably you have to have some skill set with respect to the knowledge of this substantive material or content knowledge, and then you have to be able to hopefully adapt your particular instructional techniques to those conditions to help a student. From the standpoint of an evolutionary perspective, those kinds of adaptations are called facultative. The idea that they're sort of traits that are sensitive to changes in the environment, rather than just full force applying them no matter what environment you were in. That doesn't explain anything, but it does raise questions about, so why would teaching have begun in any respect, provide that, at least the general potential for people to teach, even if not everyone being able to do it as successfully as others might have done.
Right, right. Does teaching, deliberate teaching, deliberate pedagogy, does that seem to be something that's unique to our species, given the sorts of theory of mind that you're talking about, that's important for teachers to have a sense of what one's students don't know? Is deliberate teaching something that's specific to humans?
Well, from the standpoint of having a theory of mind with an intention to modify behaviors, yes. That said, there are certain animal species that do seem to um, teach in some more limited sense that actually was defined a little over 20 years ago. That kind of operational definitions given that suggest, well, you could say teaching is occurring if um, the organism is modifying its behavior in the presence of another observer. If that initial organism, the first organism, is incurring some cost in doing so, or else at least the teaching behavior isn't providing any benefit at all.
Right.
And the result of that is the other organism acquiring some kind of behavior or skills that might not have done otherwise. And there is some evidence for that in animals,
right.
But the way that teaching behavior runs off, if you will, seems to be kind of more procedural, and in ways that, at least what we know of those animals, they would not have the cognitive capacity to, quote, recognize lack of knowledge. And yet the behaviors themselves often appear to reflect that kind of skill.
Right.
Nobody's saying that they do. That's why some people have argued that it's great to study teaching in lower animals, but you're not necessarily going to learn about how that evolved for humans. And some people have been outright in their comments that they think that animal teaching is not a precursor to human teaching. So that may not answer questions about um, the fitness aspects with respect to why adults would, in some cases, incur costs to their own behavior in order to advance the learning of younger individuals. And indeed, if that were occurring initially, it's most likely to have been done with respect to one's own kin, not necessarily many strangers.
Right.
So it's difficult to sort of explain how we even got from that original point to contemporary teaching.
Right. So, um, looking at teaching through an evolutionary lens, like you are, what implications does that have maybe for training teachers today?
Well, one is, I think that, and this is partly related to the evolutionary developmental psychology as well, when it comes to the sort of theory of mind aspects. But I think we're simply having the recognition that students don't know something, okay, that's a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
But where you go from there and how you modify your own behaviors to what you judge to be deficiencies or lack of knowledge is very complicated. And we don't know how, um, much of that could be improved by understanding the proximate mechanisms. But I do think that understanding more about those origins of teaching skills to begin with could improve ways of doing that. The other I mentioned, I think, was in part identification of those individual differences. And you asked, could everybody teach? Well, maybe everyone can improve, but
Right.
that doesn't mean that they'd improve to the point that we want them in the classroom.
Right.
And so, how can we identify those factors? And are some of the original functional adaptations something that could inform that in some
Right.
way that would be very helpful? And we don't know much about that. We really don't. Um, and actually, one of the other speakers who you may be talking to has a view that even in uh, contemporary traditional societies, if you study those, you don't find a lot of evidence for the kinds of skills that that younger folks learn as being directly or explicitly taught.
Right.
That's not to say that parents don't engineer or structure the environment to
Right.
improve learning, and that's another aspect of instruction that could be helped, that we could understand more about if we looked at the origins in terms of the evolutionary contributions.
Right. Very good. Very good. Well, Dan, our time is about up, but I will ask you the final question that we've been asking all of the conference participants, and you've been addressing this throughout, but I'll ask it anyway to give you, I guess, a parting shot at it. But what is the value added of thinking about teaching from an evolutionary perspective?
I think, yes, it is primarily, if we understand something about the functional origins of current behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
then that may also help contribute to our understanding of motivational factors that are still driven by characteristics that uh, were representative of our ancestors, hunter-gatherers, in the Pleistocene method. And I think that, along with factors that um, help sculpt uh, the brain, really can inform us about some of the constraints that may even operate today in the ways we think about others and how to adapt our behaviors toward others. That hasn't, by most accounts, changed
Mm-hmm.
much with respect to the amount of time it takes for those sorts of behaviors and their underlying factor to be modified. So I think those origins really give us a unique perspective that we're really just beginning to learn about.
Right, great, fantastic. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with me about your presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.